So, people that have more amps and cabs than they should have. That's why you're here. This is not going to be an easy review. This is not going to be a quick review. This is not going to be for the guy on a budget. You're not that because you bought a bunch of amps. And you want the highest quality gear to switch between them in the safest and most bestest sounding way. That's why you're here. So, we have this ridiculous setup with all that shit and that thing. And mics and all that. Wow. Why? Because we got the Fryette ZMACS here, which is an amp switcher and a cab switcher. And then it's got some other things in it. So to really wrap your head around it, you have to understand what these things do and what your needs are. Let's take it out of the box. Now I get a whole bunch of questions like, oh, you just pushed a button and you went to another amp. How do you do that? There are now several companies on the market. One of the first is the one that I use in several studios. Well, now I'm also using this, but Ampede. I'm a good friend, Peter Ahrens. That's the Ampede 88S. I use two of these behind each other, cascaded in Studio A. One of them in Studio B. This is great. This is 8 amps, 8 cabs. That's 8 cabs is way more than you should have. And all the stuff in the back, relatively straightforward. Plug in your guitar. It goes to 8 amps with instrument cables. Comes back with 8 speaker cables. Goes to 8 speakers if you wanted to, but it can also go to 1 speaker with speaker cables. There's also an attenuator loop. That's what this thing does. However, what if you've got a 16 ohm cab? Your amp is plugged in with 8 ohm because 3 of the other cabs are 8 ohm. Well, when you go to the 16 ohm cab, what happens with the 88S? There's going to be an ohmage impedance mismatch. Is that a big deal? No. Usually it doesn't hurt the amp unless you're really, really cranking it, and you shouldn't do that. We don't need that anymore. Amps sound great at lower volumes now. And that mismatch isn't necessarily the biggest issue when it comes to danger to the equipment, but tonally that can change something. So ideally, you're running 8 into 8, 16 into 16, 4 into 4. Makes total sense. But you can't always do that when you're mixing and matching certain amps that only have certain outputs and cabs that only have certain inputs. That's where the ZMACS is the first one on the market that can actually fix that. At a similar price range to the 8x8 from Ampede, this does 4x4. But it does a whole bunch more that rhymes. It has 2 attenuator loops. One that can be switched on the front right here. One that's always on. We're going to get into why. It already has MIDI built in, so if we look in the back all the way to the left, there are MIDI ports. It's got foot switchable stuff. You can actually, from the front, external 1, external 2, switch your amp if you wanted that. So you could actually have a MIDI command sent to it that switches to the amp, changes the amp's channel, and switches to another cab. It is simply another kind of tool. If the Ampede is what you need, that rhymes again, that's fine. If you have a specific kind of need, which is impedance switching, you don't need all the amps, all the cabs. What you could do is get 2 of these and actually cascade them to do 4 cabs, but 7 amps. It's rather complicated. We're going to get into it a little bit later. I could explain what the stuff on the front does right here. Let's look at some product shots, okay?
It's not a crime, it's only kindness, no need to cry, already lifeless, it's not a crime, it's only kindness.
we're not going to go into sounds right away because I think you should understand what we're looking at and what's going to happen in this video. So here's about 20 minutes of explaining everything on this thing, front to back, all the possibilities, going into bypass, override the bypass, what all that stuff means. It's complicated. I read the manual cover to cover and try to give you an online manual. That's coming now. If you want to hear sounds, and they're literally amps into cabs, and technically this should be transparent in the middle, not doing what it's supposed to do, but sound-wise, not much, then skip to the section afterwards, right? But first, I want you to understand this thing. And if you're here, and you got that money, and that's the thing you want, you're going to spend the time. Grab coffee, follow me. Okay, because the ZMACS is the kind of product that if you've made it into this video, you actually are looking for a solution like that, and you're not just like, I wonder what that does. That's not what this video is about. That means we really have to go through everything. And I read the manual cover to cover, and I'm still, even though I really know this shit, a little bit iffy on some of the stuff. So let's go through the front and back panel, and I'll try to elaborate on all the stuff. It is a very unique box. And I think we have to talk about all the different things. So obviously, on the left side of the front panel, you can select your amp. Rather simple, push on it, done. Push on it again if it's already selected, and it will be a mute. That's actually rather nice to just switch guitars and stuff like that if you don't have cables with switches. So obviously, the next section is the very important one. Select the impedance of your amp. On the left, select the impedance of your cab. You can deliberately mismatch if you want to do that and experiment with the sounds. Unless you're really cranking your amp, you're not going to break something. Obviously, caution, it's not massively recommended to do that. The best sounds should be when it is matched. You have a 16 ohm cab, you're using the 8 ohm out of your amp for reasons, and then you can actually have a match that should result in the best possible sound. However, if you want not the best possible sound because it's just something you like, you can try that. Now, if you have 8 selected on the left and 8 selected on the right, this impedance matching tech in the ZMACS is actually not active. It's bypassed. It's just sending straight through because there is no matching to be done. Now, that bypass can be overridden, right? That is a possibility if you so choose. And then it is that whole tech is then in it, even though you've got 8 and 8 selected on both sides. If you want to mismatch, what you can do is you have an 8 ohm output from your amp and a 16 ohm cab. Select 8 and 8, and then the tech is overridden, it's bypassed, but you are actually mismatching. That's how you actually do a deliberate mismatch, okay? It is recommended not to do that, but okay, you can, because it's a different sound. Then next to it, of course, is select one of your 4 connected cabs. Very simple. You can select 2 cabs, and when you do that, it automatically steps down the impedance 1 step further down because it has to. That is, now we're like in a territory where I really don't know what I'm talking about. So we're doing the impedance matching, that's great, but then you've got 2 cabs. What if they're different impedance? I don't know. But you can go to 2 cabs, and apparently it's fine. Next is the switchable loop. And that's for an attenuator. So this thing, which, as we're going to see in the back, has actually 2 loops for attenuators. If your attenuator can be switched on and off, so pretty much bypassed, not on and off, but bypassed on the attenuator itself, you could put it into the always on loop because you can turn the attenuator off on itself. If you have an attenuator that cannot be switched or bypassed on the attenuator itself, you can go into the switched attenuator loop, which is then switchable on the front panel. And I would assume also programmable. So external 1 and 2, I didn't quite understand that. But that actually is pretty cool. You have a TRS output for a switch or relay, as we sometimes call it. And with that, you could actually go to an amp and switch its reverb on and off, or its channels. Yeah, so the ZMACS can get a MIDI signal in to go to a different program change, amp, cab, but also the amp's channel. So you could actually stay on the cab, stay on the amp, and use MIDI to switch the amp in an analog way. There are two different functions you can do. That's pretty cool. Just a nice add-on. You can store with the last button. So first you send a MIDI command to it. So you're saying, you go to your MIDI switcher, program change 17, then you set anything up you want, hit store, and that will then be on 17. Rather simple. All you got to do is first send the MIDI command. That's it. And that's the front panel. Whew! Let's go to the back panel. Now that's a whole other ballgame of complexity, right? Let's go through it. The link is an output, which means you can link to a second ZMACS if you wanted to, and the wiring to cascade them is, I'm going to say, complicated at best. Holy crap. There's a whole page on it in the manual at the end that shows you how to cascade them. You can do 7 amps into 4 cabs. Now, I have to say, with the ampede switches, if it's an 8x8, for example, you could cascade them and actually get another 8x8. You're not sacrificing any cabs. So with the ZMACS, getting that amount of amps and cabs isn't possible. But do you really need that? I mean, actually, 4 cabs and 7 amps is already quite a big setup, but it also requires you to buy 2 ZMACS, which is, a little bit more costly. But the benefit, of course, is the impedance switching. So then we forgot to talk about the input on the front panel. The input on the front panel is buffered. There's an input on the back. When it's used, either the front turns off the back or the back turns off the front, one of those. And there's also a buffered called active one on the back. But there is a passive one on the back if you do not want to send a buffered signal to your amp. Don't really see why that would be an issue, but if it is an issue, because, I don't know, maybe because you've got one amp, you've got right before the amp passed the ZMACS, you've got a fuzz that doesn't like buffering. Something like that. Okay. So those are the options. Then we go to the amps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Send into your amp input. Simple. Those are instrument cables. Then we come from the amps, speaker outputs. So the next thing will be speaker cables going into 4 inputs from amp output 1, 2, 3, 4. Straightforward and simple. Now, because there is a load connected to the amps, either with the attenuator or with the actual cabs, everything's safe. Now, if we simply we're not loading down the amp because it's already happening with what's connected past the ZMACS, so the ZMACS doesn't need an internal load, let's call it that, doesn't need to suck up all the power. All we got to do is reduce the volume to line level, and then we have a line level direct out, which it has. And that can be used to power an IR loader pedal, go into your DAW on your interface. That is line level out of the amps. Pretty convenient. I would assume, caution, this is not a load box. Even if I'm lying about this, do not run it without a load. Meaning, have a cab on it or have an attenuator on it. Because I'm pretty sure, and even if I'm wrong, I'm not destroying anything here. I'm pretty sure you shouldn't run this without a load attached, right? There's nothing about that in the manual, or I skipped over it. But I think issuing that warning is erring on the side of caution. I think that's how you say that. So let's get to the attenuator loops. Now there are two attenuator loops, which is kind of cool. I don't quite understand why exactly you need the normal one. So the normal one is always on. And if you don't want the attenuator, you can turn it off on the attenuator itself and bypass, right? Now, if your attenuator does not allow for that, like I think the aux, you can't just bypass it. Then you would put that in the switched attenuator loop and switch it on the front panel. However, would you ever use both of them? They're in series, so the normal loop goes into the switched loop. Would you have an attenuator and then send it into another attenuator? I mean, technically you could. I don't even know what's happening with impedance at this point. This is way outside my bailiwick. As they say in Scotland, a bailiwick is an area of expertise. Learn Scottish with Henning. So, no, that's not my bailiwick. I don't know. But there is an attenuator loop specifically for your gear, whatever your gear is, if you choose to attenuate, which you should because your ears, ouchie. Then we go to the 4 different cabs, maximum 4 different cabs, and obviously the impedance is selected on the front. Ground lift for in case you have ground lift issues with your attenuators and your attenuators don't have ground lifts. Push all those ground lifts in, I guess, and if you've got hum, hopefully that helps. If you still have hum, you might want to use a hum no from Morley. If you need to fix hum in instrument level signals, use the hum eliminator. Always a good idea to have both on site, maybe several, to battle issues with really complex systems, and we're really talking about complex systems. Now, one of the nice things is that if you're using a power station from Fryette, or alternatively a Boss TAE core, something like this, an attenuator that has an effects loop, right? The cool thing is you would be able to put effects into that loop, which will be applied post power amp. So your amp is loud and blah. It goes into the ZMACS, goes into the power station, which turns it into a line level signal, runs it into effects, uses its tube power amp to make it loud again, runs into the cabs. By the way, impedance should be selected 8 and 8 in the attenuator. That's the recommendation. And then technically, and I don't know how that works, it's not an issue. We're still doing the impedance matching. Again, not my bailiwick, no clue how that works. It's magic. But the great thing is that gives you post-amp effects primarily for your time-based effects for all connected amps. So using a power station actually gives you an effects loop post-amps for amps that A, don't have effects loops, and B, even if your amp has an effects loop, don't even use that, because whatever great effects you have, Eventide H90 or whatever, you would be able to apply them to all connected amps. However, you also have to buy a power station. Again, you could also buy the TAE core, which uses class AB power amp to then power the speakers. Honestly, power station with this, probably your best bet. You could also likely use power load IR from Fryette, which is not an attenuator, but it is a load box. But you could actually probably use that behind the DI out to run IRs and other things. I think that also has a line level input. Really complex systems, but thing is, Fryette has solutions for most of this stuff to make a killer rig, all switchable, MIDI, all that stuff. What else do we have? Oh, so the quick switch is for the Fryette foot switch that you can get sold separately. I don't have one, but you can use that, and then you can have really just, two different settings. The remote out is, as I said, a TRS for two different switching functions going to your amp. Either you go TRS into your amp because it already has a TRS input, or your amp has two normal jacks, and that means you just have an insert cable that you use. But you can use a ZMACS for two different switching functions. Then the power input, and we're good. The most important thing and the most special thing is on the front panel, we have the impedance switching. The tech inside is off when you go 4/4, 8/8, 16/16, right? Because it doesn't have to do anything. If you want it to do something, you can turn the tech on and override the bypass by holding amp and cap in till they're flashing, right? If you wanted to do deliberate impedance mismatching, have the bypass active, so it's not doing anything. Go to 8/8, it's not doing anything, but then actually switch to a cap that's not 8/8. Then you're doing what you would be doing by connecting the wrong cap to the wrong, that kind of stuff. We covered a lot. Back to the guy sitting in that room with the thing. If you're still here, great for you. Let me show you the setup. It's utterly ridiculous. I'm going into a pedal board for reasons of I need tuning and a little looper. That's completely unnecessary. Next to the pedal board, I have a MIDI switcher, the Kadem 6. These things are actually really great, from Korea, from a company called Judas. So I programmed that to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 program changes. It's already programmed to do something on the Fryette. That's going MIDI into the ZMACS. I'm going into the back of the ZMACS on the active input right there. Then amp number 1 is this beautiful Lulis by Tube Workshop. It's a JCM 800 kind of a thing. Amp number 2 is a JCM 800 kind of a thing, namely the JCM 800 modified by Marshall. Cap number 1 is this 8 ohm. That's where it gets important. Oh, wait. Lulis set to 16 ohm. Marshall's 8. 16, 8. The cap from Coffee Custom Caps is 8 ohm. It's cap number 1. Cap number 2 is the Victory MK cap. Very, very nice, very expensive. That is 16 ohm. 16, 8, 8, 16. We have some mismatch possibilities here. In the switchable attenuator loop, we have the power station, the PS100. So we can attenuate, but only if this is pushed in. Okay? In the power station, I have the TC Electronic 2290p. So there's a delay, which will be in both amps if, and only if, the power station is active, which is only going to happen once this loop is pushed or illuminated green. If you can follow me, wow. This cap, which is going to be our primary cap, it's number 1, it's mic'd with the Sennheiser MD421 Compact and the beautiful N22 by AEA, which is kind of like a Royer 121. I'm going to say just better. I have no idea, but probably. Absolutely beautiful combination. And in the room, we've got an R88A from AEA. For the room sound, that's a lot to say. Just because I was lazy, in front of this, I have an SM57. But of course, I can also mix in the room sound from the 88A. It's just a 57. This is going to sound a lot fatter and better because different mics and more mics. That's crazy. Let's see what I programmed. So, number 1, we have hum here. It's just, there's a lot of stuff going and they're big amps. Gonna have some hum. Preset 1 is amp number 1, which is 16 ohm, going to an 8 ohm cap because it's cap number 1. If I switch to cap number 2, this thing knows that cap number 2 was 16 ohm. So you can't really go wrong if you've taught it that once. Okay? So preset 2 is the same amp, but going to the other cap, which is 16 ohm. This should mean we're overriding the internal tech because it's 16 to 16. Next one is the JCM 800 going to cap number 1. So 8 to 8. So it's overriding the internal impedance transformation shit. And then next preset is the Marshall going to the Victory cap, cap number 2, which is 16 ohm. And look at that. The loop is active on that one. Let's listen to that. I mean, technically, it should just sound like the amps. What do I know? So we're talking... That's the Lulis now. Amp number 1. JSM800 into the coffee cap. JSM800 into the victory cap, but now the loop is the attenuator loop is active, meaning the PSA 100 is active. Also, we have a delay. Post amp. I can have this in both amps because it's actually wired into the effects loop of the power station, which is in the attenuator loop, the switchable attenuator loop of the ZMACS. That's the Marshall. Do I want more gain there? So you can go attenuated with effects, you can do, I mean, it's all the possibilities are there. So what we got to check out is, what if we're impedance mismatching? So let's go to preset 5 that are set up. Well, amp 1 into cab 1, but I picked 8 and 8, which is wrong because the amp now is actually set to 16. So we should be able to switch between these two presets when it's impedance matched, and this one where it's mismatched. Mismatching because I'm overriding the impedance morphing right here, because I'm 8/8, and the impedances are wrong. So it's 16 into 8. Let's see. Can we actually hear a difference there? Not a clue. But I could go 16, which is what the amp is. No, now it's actually just wrong. So right now, I could do this. So now it's active. The amp is giving out 16, but I'm telling it it's 8. The cab is 8, but I'm telling it it's 16. So it's really doing two wrong things. Is that going to break things? Gonna have to save that. It's saved. Yes, there is a difference. It is minor. It's probably also not advisable to do this long term, but there is a definite difference when the impedance is correct, which it is now. We have a bit of a fuller sound. It gets a little bit more fizzly in the top end, a little bit less in the bottom end when it's not matched. So we can go to the other cab here with the same amp. This into this. That amp with the effects attenuated, but I could also go into there, attenuated with effects. Well, I think you get the general idea. That's what the ZMACS does. Utterly unique on the market. It comes, of course, with the corners and stuff. I like that you don't have to have it rack mounted, so it can sit on something. They need to add some little feet for it, I think. But it's, of course, meant to be rack mounted. Full disclosure, for the price of the ZMACS, you can get other amp switches that will do more amps and cabs. 4 and 4 is nice, but others at a similar price have more options in terms of volume. That sounds wrong. In terms of how many amps and cabs you can have. But they don't have the impedance manipulating magic stuff. The external switches are nice, built-in MIDI, 2 attenuator loops. Feature-wise, this beats the others, except for the amount of amps and cabs you can have. However, you can, of course, stack it. Now, if you're saying, I have an impede switcher, I like it, I like that I have all the amps and cabs, but I'd like to have the impedance transfer modulation. You can actually wire this into the attenuator loop of your impede, trigger it with MIDI, so as you're switching on the impede to your amp and cab, it's actually doing the correct impedance. So if you want that feature, but more amps, a combination of both will do you well. Thank you, Stephen Fryette, for being a crazy, crazy motherfucker. That's what you are. I had to set up probably one of the most complicated videos I've ever done. But since I have it, I'm going to film another video comparing these two amps. But that's a different video. I'll put links below and animals at the end.